French President Emmanuel Macron, who is on a 3-day working visit to the North African country of Algeria, has indicated that both countries should move beyond their painful past and, of course, look forward to the future. He made this revelation on Thursday, August 25th, as he arrived in the North African country. The trauma of French colonial rule in Algeria and the bitter independence war that ended itself in 1962 have haunted relations between the countries for decades and played into a diplomatic dispute that erupted last year. Macron, after a meeting with his Algerian counterpart, President Abdelmadjid Tebboune, stated that both nations have a complex, painful common past which has at times prevented them from looking to the future in a unique direction. The president of the North African country, on his part, said he hoped the visit will open up new perspectives for partnership and cooperation. Algeria in recent times have become the most important for France because of the North African gas. His visit comes after a time when the French president last month visited Cameroon, Benin and Guinea-Bissau. Is France trying to atone for its sins, and what does this mean for Algeria? Find out in today's edition of Voice It. Stay with us. Thank you immensely, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us on a new edition of Voice It over Pan-African channel for you media, where today we are discussing Emmanuel Macron, French president's visit to Algeria, of course, the North African country, which is not just rich in oil, but rich, of course, in African gas. And of course, these French president's visit comes at a time when the country or more African countries are trying to eradicate French presence from the African continent. And of course, I'm not alone. This afternoon, I'm joined by SHITTU, who is the digital news desk editor in Nigeria. Thank you for joining us on today's edition. Mr. SHITTU, good afternoon. Okay.
Hello.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you.
We equally have Mr. ELVIS NJINE BANEH. He is the National Communications Secretary for the Popular Actions Party, as well as a political analyst here in Cameroon. Good day, sir.
Good afternoon, madam, and good afternoon, of course, to all the viewers of For You TV. It's a pleasure being with you today.
Thank you immensely for honoring our invitation. Before we get down to discussing today's topic of discussion on the table, I'd like you all to take a listen to this detailed report compiled to us by our newsroom. French President Emmanuel Macron, on a 3-day trip to Algeria from Thursday, August 25th, hopes he would end a diplomatic role and create a fertile ground to develop his relationship with young Algerians, but the North African country's leader may prove hard to win over. According to sources, President Abdelmadjid Tebboune is interested in solid investment commitments, and for Macron to atone for comments he made last year regarding the country's history and its ruling elite. For France, better relations with its former colony are growing more important as a result of energy shortage, which stem from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, hence raising concerns for North African gas. Algerians, meanwhile, want to take advantage of higher energy prices to ensure big contracts and investment projects, as it has already done with Italy and Turkey, locking in revenues that would help it ride out any lean years in future. The Élysée Palace said that French president's delegation will include the heads of hydrocarbons company NJINE tech company Free, but there would be no business contracts. With Macron's last visit to Algeria in 2017, he was warmly greeted by young Algerians, a gesture which made him describe French colonial rule there as a crime against humanity. Macron seems keen to build on that goodwill this week with a planned visit to commemorate Algerians' martyr years of independence from France. The president has chosen focus on the future during his visit, said an advisor to Macron. It should be noted that French President some weeks ago had visited some African countries in a bid to renew ties, as it seems France is losing its grip on the continent to Russia and China.
Having listened to that detailed report, I would like to channel our first question to you, Mr. NJINE BANEH. What assessment or what evaluation do you make of French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to Algeria, given some time ago he had visited other African countries, including Cameroon?
Well, what I will say is the fact that the French president is making his presence very, very felt on the African continent all this while, it is just to confirm the fact that many Africans today are beginning to gain consciousness as to the fact that they need to totally detach themselves from France. And of course, France having noticed that she is no longer near in the continent, he is coming this time around to try to see if he can lobby, if he can permit me to use the term better, you see, to be able to reaffirm the position that France has often had within the African continent and of course the African countries. So I think for the beginning that's what I can say, or my analysis that I can make of his presence to Africa. And I will continue simply by saying our African leaders must be very careful with his coming and the things he says, because when you hear him, for instance, mentioning the fact that that France and Algeria had a painful past, it is the same thing he mentioned in Cameroon, talking of having to form a joint commission to trace the histories and all that. You know, France is a very poor country, and you trust France, honestly speaking, you will do that at your own risk. So all of this is already to tell us in advance that France will not be willing to accept take the blame for all the crimes that she committed in Africa, and that's why she talks about a joint painful past. So for the beginning, madam, I think we must be very, very aware of Africa, of France. We must be careful with France, and of course know the type of shady deals that they may want to bring onto the table for our leaders to sign, knowing fully whether at the end of the day it is the youth that will pay the price.
Definitely, you said it all. The youths are definitely going to pay the price. I would like to channel our next question, of course, to you, Mr. SHITTU FOWORA. What assertion do you make of French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to Algeria?
Thank you very much. It's a beautiful thing to see that the French President Macron gestures to countries with which it has ties. Now, for instance, President Macron is in Algeria. For me, it's a good thing. And it's a good thing because the more countries are able to cement cooperation and bilateral ties, the better. However, it doesn't take away from the fact that there's a painful colonial past that continues to haunt the French people, for which they always try to make conciliatory approach towards having a better working relationship. Don't forget that a lot of Algerians are in France, resident, working as expatriates, as people who have links with French, they are French colonialists, as people who, for example, have studied or are working there. Therefore, if you also recall that French president was also in Algeria, in his 2017 campaign to reach out to as many people as possible to have his voice heard by varying set of people. So it's a welcome development, like I did say earlier. However, we continue to be wary and mindful about the outcomes of some of the deliberations. Africa has become the beautiful pride of, or the beautiful bride, as the case may be, of the world because of the energy crisis that most of these countries are facing, and therefore making such gestures are understandable to bolster relationship and to ensure that there is a give and take from both sides of the divide.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, SHITTU FOWORA. So, you evoked the visit of French president in 2017 to Algeria, where he did term the colonial rule as a crime against humanity. Do you think that his visit is in a bid for France to atone for their sins?
Well, if you also heard him after that time, he didn't sound like he was willing to apologize for what the colonial, what the colonialists did in that country. Most times the colonialists, or France in this case, would rather want to be diplomatic instead of.
I think we lost Shittu FOWORA there. We're going to kick off with you, Mr. NJINE BANEH. Of course, just to ask, as I earlier asked, Mr. Shittu FOWORA, do you
carry
think
such issues and
okay,
so that you will. Yeah, can you hear?
Yeah, right on.
Yes, so I'm saying that it is very likely that France will rather not apologize at this time, but it will try to be in the good books of Algeria.
We shall be making attempts to connect back with Mr. Shittu FOWORA, who is joining us all the way from Nigeria. Just to proceed, I would like to ask you, Mr. NJINE BANEH, this 72 hours visit initiated by French President Emmanuel Macron to the North African country, given the fact that the country is very rich in gas, would you say that it is more of economic than a political visit?
I would say they are both. It's both an economic visit as well as a political visit. Political because Macron will want to do everything to wash clean France in the eyes of the world, and of course in the eyes of the Algerians, to let them think that they can actually partner with France and do good business. And of course, once he succeeds in the political sphere, to give that impression that they can, permit me use the word cohabitate, then of course it now goes into business. So in reality, he will come as a political figure, but at the background he's coming to actually negotiate for business deals. Because the truth is that we can never deny the fact that whenever France is coming to Africa, or most of these European countries, their interest is first of all what brings them here. Forget about all the promises that they may make or whatever thing. You know, when you hear Macron speak, for instance, he mentions, he touches something on the Algerian youth. And it was the same thing he said when he was back here in Cameroon. Let me tell you one thing, madam. The truth here is it just today that they discovered that there are African youth with talents? I would say no. It is because it's another way they want to tie Africans down by giving you the impression that they want to help the African youth. Then they come into your country, they earmark the best brains that you have, take them back to France and naturalize them so that they work to the French interest, while giving the impression that they are taking them for assistance for your country. So it is both political, it is an economical, but the truth is that in everything, it is first and foremost about French interest first, French interest second, and French interest third. You asked a question to my other brother panelist about on the fact if France will be willing to apologize. Let me tell you, I am one of the last Africans on earth that will ever trust France for anything. Maybe in the future France will show good faith, but as of now, I keep saying that any African leader or any nation that deals with France must be very, very careful, because France is the most dishonest country that Africa as a continent or African countries can try to get into any deals with them. They are very, very cunning when it comes to their politics. They are very, very cunning when it comes to diplomacy, and they place nothing but their interests at the forefront. And I think that's what I can say.
Okay, you earlier mentioned, so I would like to ask you this question too. Do you think that the French president is coming because he wants his country to atone for the sins of their forefathers?
No, it is. I don't know. It would look funny if someone comes to you to apologize for something he did or for something his predecessors did to you, while he himself is doing the same thing. You see, France has not ceased from being a colonial master. Let's forget about the fact that they keep talking about independent African countries. We are not yet independent. There are corporations that were signed with France that today we are still paying the price, and they continue renewing these deals. You see, France has continuously exploited African countries. France has continuously been that country, that one of those countries that protects African leaders who are corrupt, you see, and trying to always infiltrate itself into the African politics and trying to determine who becomes head of state in Africa and over not, so that these stooges work to its best interest. So France, Macron is not coming to France or to Algeria or Cameroon or Africa to ask for some sort of forgiveness or whatsoever thing. And like I say, politically speaking, they may give you that impression that is why they have come to say. But if you read deep into who France is and who Macron can be, then you understand that it is just a superficial something, like I said, to continue to lure Africans to think that there can be something hopeful. My brother mentioned something. He said it could be a good thing to cement ties. Yes, that one we agree. We are living in a global village where countries are supposed to cooperate, you see, in terms of business, in terms of policy, in terms of everything. But I still say that our African countries are still far from cooperating with European countries like France, because when these guys come to Africa, France comes with a spirit and comes with the European spirit, but negotiates deals with so-called independent African countries, where most of the leaders even work to the best interest of that same France, and under the table they sign deals that are not made known to the public. And like I earlier mentioned at the beginning of this program, at the end of the day, the youth in Africa continue to pay the price. So I still insist on the fact that we need to be very careful when we are dealing with France.
Okay, we have just gotten signals that we have SHITTU FOWORA back on board. Of course, Mr. NJINE BANEH earlier mentioned that the some kind of relations about cementing ties between the Western world and, of course, African countries. And now we have seen Algeria, which is the African country which is rich in North African gas, cementing ties with Turkey and Italy as far as the gas supplies is concerned. Now, the question I would like to channel to Mr. SHITTU FOWORA is, what do you think this visit really means to Algerians given the economic aspect of it?
Well, for Algerians, I did mention earlier, and I agree with the earlier speaker, it is about building trust, improving bilateral relationship, and of course economic fortunes. Algeria has a lot of buyers for its products, you know, and it is not an issue if it decides to sell to its colonial the colonial fathers. However, what must happen is that the ordinary Algerian must feel that everything that is being negotiated is to his own advantage, is to the betterment of the country, it is for the improvement of the economy. Now, unless in these deals, as the case may be, the fine points, the details of the deals are such that they are to the advantage of the people. If that happens, then it is fair. However, if that doesn't happen, then it is to the subjugation and the worsening of the economy, socio-economic realities of Algeria. Mind you, a lot of Algerians earn their living in France at the moment and repatriate, some of these their monies back to their country. So, in terms of balancing between the relationship between France and Algeria, in terms of their bilateral ties, in terms of economic spending, economic fortunes, it is fine. What must happen is that it should be done in ways that are amenable to both sides of the divide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you too. So we are moving now from particular to general, and I would like to link this topic with the African continent. We are seeing that there's always this foreign influence on other African countries, especially countries like Algeria that have a painful past when it comes to relations with their colonial masters. So how would you say that the African continent can eradicate foreign influence when it comes to their politics and other aspects?
Okay. One of the things that we should understand is that the African proverb says, you cannot shave a man's head without him being present. Africans must continue to choose leaders that are, that are more patriotic to their countries than being answerable to, people from the West or the East, as the case may be. And we cannot continue to blame, for example, those who are economic saboteurs, political saboteurs, those who will want to frustrate the growth and development of African countries. It is up to us in Africa to evolve political systems, to evolve economic systems, to evolve systems that will make us more resilient and more interdependent between ourselves and other African countries, than dependent on Western and Eastern nations. You will realize, for example, that the volume of trade between African countries are less than the volume of trade between African countries and Western nations. What we should be driving at is to ensure that we are able to do more within ourselves. We're able to trade more. We're able to share more information, share more, bilateral opportunities. Share more in terms of security exchange, in terms of technology transfer, in terms of learning, and development. These are things that we can do for ourselves. And so the more we look internally, the more we look inwardly, the better for us. So that when we do that, it is for the betterment and for the future of Africa. So that when we need anything, we can say within ourselves, we can reach out to ourselves and get it without the fear and concern of further or neocolonialism, as the case may be.
Thank you so much for that elaborate contribution. I'd like to move to you, Mr. NJINE. Of course, we have seen cases in Mali and Burkina Faso. Those countries are trying to remove French presence from their territories. Now, other countries like Algeria are trying to mend relations, such as bilateral relations between France and, of course, their nations. So, how do you analyze this move by, say, these other countries that are still trying to amend the relations between them and their Western powers?
Okay, permit me again begin by agreeing with my co-panelists that every African country, a former colony to any European country, has a bitter memory, has a painful past. You see, and that painful past has continued. That pain has continued till today, and still has devastating consequences almost all over Africa. This is to tell that everywhere the European put his leg or set his foot on African soil, there has always been a bitter memory. You see, now talking about countries trying to detach themselves from French influence and others trying to rather cement their ties, what I would simply say here is the crime here is not going in for any bilateral trade with France. No, you can go in for bilateral cooperation with France or any other country, but our worry here as Africans is that our leadership should grow up. Our leadership should be mature enough to know the type of deals that they cement with this particular country called France. That is the problem, you see. Now, for those who totally decide to detach themselves, again, I am okay with that, because it is not stated anywhere that because France was your former colonial master, you must deal with France, or if she was never a colonial master in Africa, it is not stated that you must deal with her in business or whatever thing before you progress. There are so many other countries in the world, and of course in Africa. And like my co-panelist earlier mentioned, it is even unfortunate that we Africans, we don't even trade amongst ourselves that we want to do with the European countries, but knowing fully well that these guys always come in with a system that is far more advanced than ours, and they will always want to scam us in their businesses, given that we have leaders who are more of stooges, answerable to the same governments in Europe, and of course people who are not that patriotic, people who think more about themselves than the good of their nations. Then the area where I would like to simply disagree with my brother is when he keeps insisting on the fact that we have Algerians in France who and a living there and repatriate money. It's true, honestly speaking, we cannot deny that. But we should understand that those are some of the things that countries like France want to hang on to say you have your nationals in our country. You see, it is because we have bad leadership in Africa and we have failed to understand who we are and the worth that we have. Because France comes to Africa, gets your raw material, goes and develops his country, and then you are rushing back to France, you see, to try to make a few euros and then send back to your continent, forgetting that it is from your own continent that he has become what he has become. So I think that to go away from French and even other foreign influence into our African politics and businesses, we need to encourage the African youth first, particularly, to actively get involved in the political affairs of their countries, because one thing in Africa today is that the African youth is not interested in the political situation of their different or respective countries. If they get involved with the numbers, they can be able to vote out of office all the stooges that are answerable to European governments and then put in place patriotic African leaders who think African and have a vision and prospects for the African continent, and of course we shall be able to do things for ourselves. We even stop our African youth from constantly trying to travel out. Come to think of it, if you take the Russian-Ukraine war now, you realize that the thanks to the war in Ukraine, countries like Egypt, countries like Ethiopia, and even in my own native village of Okubakia in Cameroon, people now are engaging themselves in wheat cultivation. It means that if this war had not come up, Africans till today would not have noticed that they could actually cultivate wheat and perhaps be able to, in the nearest future, become self-sufficient. So I want to think that we need leaders that have a vision for the continent as a whole and for their respective countries, who can put in place projects that can enable the country to develop. And of course, in that case, Europe will discover that they can only come in to deal with us on a 50-50 scale balance.
So, in your opinion, Mr. NJINE, how do you think African leaders can shield themselves from foreign influence when it comes to relations with the Western world?
The very first thing I would want to suggest here is that we need powerful institutions, not things like the AU that have no influence at all, that are telecommanded or teleguided by the Western world. We need institutions, you see, that can bring together Africans and then set conditions for partnership with the Western world, like we see with the European Union, such that when any European nation is coming to deal with any African country, you go by the conditions that have been set unanimously by all these countries. Secondly, I have said, African leaders need to first and foremost be patriotic, people who love their countries and love the continent. Because once you have such persons, take like the Assimi Goitas we are seeing today in Mali, I don't want to think that if today Mali were to go back to sign any business deals with France, I don't want to think that France will be able, let me say, to cheat them in any way, because Assimi Goita is proving himself to be somebody who is quite patriotic and loves his nation and will want to do the best for his country. Those are the type of leaders that Africa needs today. Then, of course, we should understand that we need to collaborate more amongst ourselves. You know, they always say Africa is a hospitable continent, but it's rather unfortunate that we are more hospitable to the same people who come and they deal with us negatively than being hospitable to ourselves. So there is a need for the African leaders to be also see how we can promote cooperation first amongst ourselves as Africans before we even look into the external world.
Okay, over to you, Mr. SHITTU. There's this relation, there's this say that Africans, when we cohabitate amongst ourselves, definitely we're going to prosper. So how do you think Africans can boost a cooperation amongst themselves so that it leads to possible development? Like we are seeing the case with Algeria that's trying to link up with France. How do you think Africans can make this possible so it works out for them?
Africans must develop a better means of engagement beyond rhetorics, as we have seen in some of the countries across the continent. You have, for instance, Zimbabwe that had issues with foreign presence in its country, and it was hard on those foreign farmers. Today, Zimbabwe is one of the nearly basket case of Africa because of the economic challenges it is going through. It is not enough to be patriotic, but there has to be a plan to develop and grow your country, to develop and grow institutions, to develop and grow systems that will sustain growth and development in your country. Again, beyond rhetorics, beyond saying Africa must do this for itself, Africa must genuinely employ best practices across the world. What is the reason why a lot of Africans are, leaving Africa to go to foreign soils to earn a living? It is because of the conditions created, by those countries for growth, for development, for work. They continue to attract some of the best minds and best brains across the world. So Africa must do the same. Create enabling environment for growth, fight corruption, genuinely fight corruption, and ensure that there is democratic practices and democratic ethos. That's the only way you can sustain growth and development in countries. You will see, for example, some countries have, have been through the same leader. He has the same ideas, and he has stayed there for over 10 years and has been unable to reset the country for the better. It is not how long the president stays in power, but it is by how far that country has continued to grow in a positive direction that will ensure that that country can sustain growth and development. So while across the world you have democratic practices where elections will run maybe after 4 years or after 5 years, in Africa we still have a lot of leaders who will continue to hold on to power and ensure that even the best minds in that country are unable to impact on that country. They are unable to add their own quota, of ideas to push their dreams and aspirations and goals into a formidable future.
So we are seeing that most African countries are trying to cement ties with the Western world. For instance, we have Algeria here that is trying to work out bilateral relations with Turkey, for instance, and Italy to see how they can export or become greater suppliers of the North African gas. So how do you think other African countries can support Algeria in this vision? So, because I want to recall that some time ago, Doctor, at the scene of the African Development Bank said Africans have the key to their own problems. We can resolve all our problems and, of course, make ourselves a key supplier when it comes to things like gas to the Western world, especially Europe. So how do you think other African countries can work out with Algeria to make the country or the continent itself excel?
Like I did say, one of the areas that we must look at areas in terms of cooperation, in terms of mutual development. A lot is happening on the continent, but we need to replicate it across, the continent. For instance, you have development in terms of automobiles. One of the biggest imports we have in Africa are importation of automobiles into African countries. We can have automobile plants replicated across the East, West, North, and Southern Africa, where most of the automobiles that are being imported will be locally manufactured, and then they can sell it within themselves. Again, there is knowledge sharing. The world today, the currency of trade, the strongest currency of trade is information and knowledge. That is one of the things that India, for example, is profiting from. In Africa, we must ensure that the things we know, we domesticate them, and then we ensure that we're able to make money from them. We're able to ensure that they become sources of earnings for us. For instance, if we say that Algeria exports gas to the West, there are other countries in Africa that need gas, and unless you can get gas for less than what Algeria is selling, there is no reason why you want to buy, or you would rather buy gas from elsewhere than from Algeria or from other African countries. So we must look at those areas where we can trade, we can develop, we can share, and mutually, such that these things we continue to look outwards for. We can actually benefit more from them. An example was what the Ghanaian president did some time ago. He did say that instead of exporting cocoa out of the country, he would rather the countries, the companies that manufacture cocoa-based products like chocolates, beverages, and all of that should be in their countries, employing Ghanaians.
Probably we lost Shittu for a while there, but we're hoping he's going to reconnect. Okay, that is just in line with what the East African community is actually doing when it comes to relating trade between different African countries. Mr. ELVIS NJINE, of course, I would like to ask you, what do you think, what role can other African countries do in order to cement bilateral relations between themselves in order to foster growth and development on the African continent, like is the case with Algeria that's trying to cement ties with the Western world?
Well, madam, the problem is not what they can do to cement. You see, the most important thing is what they stand to benefit in such bilateral trade or deals. Because that's where the problem lies. The truth is that the bilateral cooperations have often existed. You see, like I keep saying, from the so-called independence that was granted to the former colonies, you see, the cooperations have always been there. But the worry is that such cooperations are generally signed such that at the end of the day, the African countries don't really benefit fully as they were supposed to. So my worry rather is not what they can do to cement, because it can always be possible. Because by the way, Africa is the breadbasket of the world, and the foreign countries will always want to come towards Africa for such bilateral cooperations. The greater concern here should be what our leaders offer on behalf of their African countries and on behalf of the African continent as a whole. I think that's where the greatest problem lies. Because like my brother was just saying, At times there are even corporations where they sign and the countries are supposed to benefit in terms of billions, but at the end of the day, the billions end up in the hands of a particular people because of the corrupt system, you see. So you sign a contract under the name of a country, but the money remains in the hands of a particular family or group of friends, and at the end of the day, like I say, you will find the young in years to come who shall keep paying a price for a certain deal that was signed between their country and a European country, but when in reality the country per se never did benefit from it. So I think that the most important thing is not how to cement, because if it's a matter of cementing bilateral cooperations, we can always do that. The most important thing is the bargaining power that the different African countries have to take to the table. And of course, this bargaining power, I'm afraid, cannot be done by most of the leaders we have presently on seats in Africa. Many of them are outdated. Many of them are an old app that needs to be changed. They no longer respond with respect to the present developments or the present waves that we have around the world. So we need new leaders, young leaders, people who are educated, people who have projects, people who have a well-defined agenda for their respective countries. And of course, I keep insisting, people who are patriotic too, because once you are patriotic and you are you have that goodwill to see your country develop, the truth is that you will try to cooperate with other African leaders. You will try to cooperate with the best minds within your own country. You set forth projects that can enable the country to grow, and so you can even go towards the same European partners now to cement such ties with them, or when they come, you accept to cement such ties, but while presenting on the table concrete proposals that will go a long way in alleviating poverty and unemployment in our African continent. I have often mentioned, for instance, that it would be preferable that a country leaving Europe to come and mine maybe petroleum in Africa, for instance. We would prefer that they should come and install the refining company in Africa, you see, and employ Africans rather than just coming to pay but physical cash. They mine the raw product and they carry away. Then they create jobs in their countries and overnight, whereas the currency they have left back here will end up in the hands of a few. And that's why I keep saying I'm skeptical with countries like France, because some of the corrupt leaders that we have here are protected in office by the same France. Because so at the end of the day, they put in place people who work to their best interest and not the interest of the African countries.
Of African leaders actually is about what they stand to gain when they work together. So I'd like to ask you, in your opinion, what do you think African leaders stand to gain when they work together as one person, like the African man will say Ubuntu?
They say united we stand, divided we fall. Africa is suffering today because we are divided, and I said it is it's a regrettable thing, madam, that we Africans who are known by others to be hospitable, we should be more of enemies when it comes to dealing with our own African brothers, you see. So I want to think that unity is strength. This is just, I can sum it all just in that. Unity is strength. When we stand together as one, knowing very well that maybe if my country Cameroon is lacking in this, we can get it from Nigeria, and if Nigeria is lacking in this, they can get it from Cameroon, be it in terms of raw material, be it in terms of human resources, be it in terms of anything. Then I want to think that we stand a better way to grow. And like I earlier mentioned, we stand to benefit the most if we unite ourselves, because like I earlier mentioned, in that unity, we can now come together and create institutions for ourselves that will permit us have that force to be able to bargain with other European countries. Because I keep insisting on one thing. When France is coming to Africa as France, we are seeing just France as a country coming, but France cannot even negotiate certain deals and go beyond or out of what they have first of all agreed within the European Union, because they have conditions there now too, as a people that guide them on how they go about signing their deals in Africa. And that is what Africans are supposed to do. We should have powerful institutions. I have said things like the AU to me are non-existent, because we have even internal conflicts or back here in Africa, and the AU has never been able to do anything for the African countries in terms of resolving conflicts, in terms of the educational systems, in terms of unemployment, in